Break this down for us. What exactly is this informant accused of? Give us the story.
So essentially, this informant's relationship with the FBI dates back to 2010. So he would have been about 30 at the time. He's now 43. And over the course of that time, it apparently started off somewhat informing on business relationships, supposedly, that he had. But then he claimed to have developed these interactions with these intelligence officials overseas, specifically foreign intelligence officials, including with Russia. And he had this ongoing relationship with his FBI handler for a very long time and was giving them apparently information that was valuable, at least until recently, that they believed was mostly truthful. But back in 2020, he had planted this lie with the FBI that ended up cascading into becoming this major issue and becoming at the centerpiece of the Republican impeachment push. Basically, here, if you've ever heard anything about $5 million bribes to Joe Biden or Hunter Biden, this guy's responsible for them. This is where that all originated. And it's something that Republicans really focused on, especially over the summer, trying to get these underlying FBI documents. And they really made it the centerpiece of their entire inquiry. In fact, Jim Jordan really described this as the heart of the investigation. And James Comer also said that this was the key to this. This was what was going to unlock everything if they got that underlying document, got it out there, and began their investigation there. And really, all of that has just collapsed now because this was all just a lie that was fed way back in 2020 by someone who apparently had ties, or at least self-proclaimed ties, to Russian intelligence officials, and has until very recently been a really valuable informant for the FBI. So really just an incredible set of circumstances here where you have this lie that was planted back almost 4 years ago now that is now doing something I think that the Russians would be very excited about, which is basically interrupting the 2024 presidential campaign and causing these enormous impacts for the sitting president of the United States.
Right. This guy was in court yesterday and released with an ankle bracelet. Now prosecutors are saying they want him in jail. What changed?
So essentially, they tried to get him locked up in Las Vegas, and the federal magistrate judge there said that he could be freed. They asked him also to stay that decision so that they could sort of appeal that, and the magistrate judge there did not agree. So he was indeed let free, as you sort of see on the screen there, covering himself up pretty well as he left. And we really don't have a photo of what this individual looks like ultimately. So now what's happening is, because he was arrested after coming back from this international flight into Las Vegas, that's where he landed. That's where he initially appeared in federal court. But ultimately, this case is going to come out of California. So basically now the feds have gone and say, hey, to the federal judge who's actually going to handle this case in California, we'd like a review of this. Can you take a second look, maybe sort of overrule the federal magistrate judge who made that initial decision in Las Vegas?
It comes as no surprise. Democrats have had a lot to say about this. I want to share a bit of what Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin said earlier.
I think the Smirnov revelations destroy the entire case. I mean, Smirnov was the foundation of the whole thing. He was the one who came forward to say that that Burisma had given Joe Biden $5 million, and that was just concocted out of thin air. And so it was that foundation that the whole house of cards has been built on, and the entire thing has collapsed. But of course, we don't even have to rely on Smirnov's own words, because there have been somewhere near a dozen witnesses who have completely repudiated and refuted these essential allegations.
Ryan, you said it a moment ago, even Jim Jordan has said this was the heart of the case against the Bidens. So now that the heart has basically been ripped out of the body, what's left?
It's a good question. If this was a court of law, obviously, this case would have gotten to trial in the first place, right? This case would never have been brought in the first place. But, certainly if it had gotten to that stage, it would have been tossed out. This guts the entire thing, right? You're saying this guy lied. But, you can just look and compare what Republicans were saying at the time when they thought this was so important with what they're saying now. Of course, now they're saying it's not so important after all. We've got all this other stuff. But, you can just look back at what they said and just use your own brain and, listen to what they actually said at the time about how important this was. And then, judge for yourself whether or not there's much else there to go with, because they really emphasized just how incredibly important this was over and over and over and over again. And now we come to find out that, this was something that was just made up back in 2020. It really is an extraordinary set of events. And in any other place but politics, you would have people who are probably deeply embarrassed. But, you're not going to hear, obviously, Jim Jordan coming out and giving an apology to the president of the United States for spreading some of these sort of baseless lies about him.
Isn't that absurd and funny and not funny and brutal and horrible all at the same time? I want to bring Molly and Barr back in there. Ryan's saying it in a tongue-in-cheek way. In any other venue, in any arena, it would be humiliating, but not in politics, which in theory should be where one holds him or herself in the highest regard.
Well, and there was a time when these Congress people would resign in disgrace, right? I mean,
but now we live shame-free in D.C.
Right, exactly. But you'll remember even Richard Nixon resigned. So, look, this was always a vibes-based impeachment. They were always trying to find a high crime and misdemeanor.
A vibes-based impeachment. I really like that.
Thank you. But they were always trying to find a high crimes and misdemeanor. They could never really find one. They got one. It got debunked. And now, in a normal world, these people would resign.
Constitutional scholars have been talking about vibes-based impeachments for decades. I really do like that. Barb, how do prosecutors begin to verify the claims of somebody connected to Russian intelligence who now admits to pushing lies? Like, you're a prosecutor. What do you even do with that?
Yes, it's the reason that it is so reckless to take unverified information, as the House Republicans did, and try to base an impeachment on that. Christopher Wray, the head of the FBI, had come out earlier to say this is information that was unconfirmed and unverified. And so what I believe David Weiss did here, the special prosecutor who is investigating this case, is to try to confirm the statements that the informant was making. And some of the ways you do that, for example, what they did here is they tried to compare his own travel records with times he said he was in Russia meeting with people. And they concluded that those times didn't match up. And so the things that he was saying could not be independently verified. And in fact, the records they did have refuted those things. And so without any basis in fact, they have now charged him with coming forward to the FBI and making false statements. And let me also say this, Stephanie, sometimes informants make statements and you can't verify it. You say it's unconfirmed and you just write it off. We're not going to charge him with a crime, but we're not going to act on this because we think this is information that's not verifiable. To charge somebody with a crime means that the prosecutor believes that they can prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt, that it is affirmatively false. Not simply that it is unconfirmed, but that it is indeed false. And so these allegations mean that a prosecutor has reviewed this evidence and found that there is evidence that these claims are false.
Molly, I am so immature, I couldn't get past the fact that this man's name is Smirnoff. But beyond that, well, I mean, you can't make it, for real, his name was, I was sure it was code. What was your reaction when you learned that this informant, in just the past few months, was peddling lies that could impact our election, which, as you heard, is happening in 258 days?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's very scary, but I think also, more importantly, Fox News has been selling this story since it's come out. And Sean Hannity has done numerous monologues on it. Now it's debunked. I don't think
now it's debunked, and what are they doing with it now?
Right. And nobody is, if past is prologue, which it usually is, Fox News is not saying we were wrong, we've been corrected, this was not true. They're just moved on to something else. So you're going to have a part of the country that does not know this was debunked. There's a pretty significant part of this country that will never hear the ending of this story.
For more, let's bring in NBC News Washington correspondent Yamiche Alcindor and Dr. Mamie McLean, a physician at Alabama Fertility. Yamiche, this is extraordinary. What can you tell us?
I mean, there are thousands and thousands of patients that are now wondering whether or not they will be able to create families, because this is as you said, the largest hospital system in Alabama. So you're talking about people who are trying to grow their families, who want to grow their families, and who now are being told by the state that that's personally not going to be possible for them. The ramifications here could be widespread, because you have other states like Florida who are considering similar legislation and similar moves. You also have 11 states who already have on the books personhood laws deeming fetuses to be people. So this is something that could go on and on and on. And I think there are just so many ways that we look at this and think, and a lot of people are looking at this and thinking that this could have sort of unintended consequences, because Stephanie, let's remember that the couples at the heart of this were suing because their embryos were destroyed and they were angry and wanted to file a wrongful death lawsuit. And now those couples, at least based on what's going on, and the Alabama Medical Association saying that they expect other clinics and other providers of IVF to follow suit here, that couple could not possibly pursue the IVF that they felt so dearly about, that they were suing for wrongful death. And we also, of course, are seeing the political implications here. The vice president was just tweeting out, and I want to read part of her tweet. She said the decision is outrageous and it is already robbing women of freedom to decide when and how to build their families. So you're hearing from Democrats who are saying, hey, this is part of why they as Democrats were warning about not overthrowing Roe v. Wade. And now you're, of course, having to have Republicans making the hard decision to say, are you going to back this or not? We see Nikki Haley saying that she believes embryos are children, but it's going to be very interesting to hear from others, especially because a number of evangelical Christians, organizations, as well as personal people, they are in support of IVF. They want people to be able to have more children. But now here is a complication that maybe some did not think was going to come, because a number of states, including in Tennessee, right after Roe v. Wade, the attorney general there was saying this is not going to be what happens to people. We're not going to be a country that stops IVF as a result of what happened with Roe v. Wade. But we're obviously seeing the difference here.
Dr. McLean, how is this impacting your clinic? I mean, what have your patients been saying over the last 24 hours?
Our patients are incredibly worried. They're confused, and they feel like they've been left alone by the state of Alabama. We have patients who plan for months in the lead up to both IVF and a frozen embryo transfer. So these treatments they've been ongoing for quite a while. And so the decision to cancel a patient's treatment is devastating news for them.
So what are you telling your patients tonight, right? What's the game plan for your clinic moving forward?
Our clinic has been in discussions since this ruling came out. We were made aware of it Sunday morning. And since then, we've been in discussions with our legal team, with physicians across the state, with the ASRM, with Resolve, the advocacy group, with our embryologist. And we're concerned that the ask of both physicians and embryologists to continue to offer IVF treatments in Alabama is untenable. So we're incredibly worried that IVF as it stands will not continue in Alabama.
Here's what I don't understand. It is standard practice in IVF to fertilize multiple eggs and transfer only one. So what happens to women who have already begun that process?
So I think that's a clinic by clinic decision. In our clinic, we have decided to continue with the standard of care for patients who are in the middle of treatment. We feel like we can't pull the rug out from under them in the middle of treatment, but we are concerned moving forward that we will be unable to fertilize eggs in an IVF lab.
Yamiche, how is the White House and the Biden campaign reacting to this?
I read the statement from the VP. They are denouncing this. They are saying that this is outrageous, that this is really part of the consequences, what they would say are the bad consequences of what happened when the Supreme Court decided to overturn Roe v. Wade. They're also Democrats, as well as the White House in particular, they're leaning into the politics of this. I was just in Wisconsin a couple of weeks ago with the vice president who launched this national tour pushing for abortion access. And she was doing so in particular by talking about personal stories, including a number of women who wanted to have children and had complications and found themselves on the wrong end of a number of legal challenges that allowed them not to get what the vice president would say life-giving care and care that they needed at the time. So the Democrats and the White House are both denouncing what's happening in Alabama, but also saying, look, you need to be thinking about this to voters. You need to be thinking about this in November when you think about who you want to put into office, because we can also, of course, I think as a nation, see that there is going to be possibly even more consequences to this. And as Republicans have in different states all over this country, they've been pushing for more and more restrictions on abortion. So you can imagine that Alabama might not be and likely will not be the last state to deal with it. So the White House is definitely looking at this as a political issue, while Republicans are, I think, really trying to figure out how to talk about this issue. Because, again, IVF is one of these things that so many couples, thousands of couples, including Republican couples, prominent Republican officials, have talked about IVF giving them the chance to have these families that they wanted so badly. So this is really a clash in some ways, a political clash waiting to happen.
Brian, let's turn to you. Welcome to the 11th hour.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
These are tangible things, right? Junk fees, lower prescription drug prices, with the exception of the companies that put these fees upon us. It's not political. Everybody likes this. Why isn't it sinking in, or is it, and it's not enough to move the needle?
I think part of the reason it's not sinking in is because there is a coordinated campaign to distract us from watching all this. I mean, you've been speaking about the fact that the Republicans in the House are so focused on this, what we now know is a Russian disinformation campaign to prove some non-existent, fraud between Joe and Hunter Biden. I mean, that is to distract the American people from the fact that what Biden is accomplishing in office is delivering tangible wins. I mean, legislatively, we have PACT Act, CHIPS Act, the American Rescue Plan, the infrastructure package, the gun safety law, the Inflation Reduction Act, canceling, almost $150 billion for 3.9 million borrowers and adding 14.5 million jobs. I mean, these are wins on top of wins. So the Republicans are desperate to make sure that we can't see this stuff.
Is it that we're just addicted to the negative, Tim? When President Biden skips the Super Bowl interview, it is a huge story. He's under fire for hiding out. But when he is actually out there on the trail, pushing his wins, city to city, town to town, it seems like people don't notice. What can he do?
Yeah, I think, to be frank, President Biden has a lot of strengths, and this might not be the best one, right? He's not the most clear and compelling messenger. It's not like it's Obama out there. I think we can all just recognize that. So the team around him has to do this job of selling it. He's got one thing in his favor. He's got a couple things, but one of the things in his favor this year is that they are going to have a lot of money to be able to tell this story on the airwaves and to try to get in front of people on social media, on TikTok, who might not be, watching the local news. I do think that probably highly educated, highly engaged voters, local news watchers, they do know about this. He's got to get to the rest of those voters. I think they're going to be able to have a lot, if you look at the numbers for January, they're going to have a lot more money to do that than the Trump campaign this year. And I think that they need surrogates and the VP and all hands on deck for this over the coming months. And I don't think it's panic time yet, but they have to recognize this is a challenge and that the president's going to need help.
Brian, President Biden is slamming Donald Trump for his comments on NATO, on Alexei Navalny, hitting him over the border, but he's not really talking a lot about defendant Trump. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think the reason is because Republicans are so desperate to try to frame this as prosecutions that are being done on behalf of Joe Biden, and
of course
they're not. I mean, these are juries that are voting out these indictments. These are prosecutors that are bringing these.
If the DOJ were working for Joe Biden, do you think
they wouldn't have indicted his own son?
Do you think he would indict his own son, or her report would have come out? Like, let's just remind America.
I mean, it's wild, but still, because so much of this is optics, so much of this is the narrative. He has to be extra careful and take all of these steps, and it kind of sucks, frankly, because, these are major weaknesses that, in a campaign you should be able to talk about. And I believe that Joe Biden should. But because it's so easily exploited by the right when they will point to these things happening to Donald Trump and frame him as the victim, Joe Biden does have to be careful and kind of take these extra precautions.